So, let's talk about classes and specs that you should probably play if you're kind of new for PvP or you're trying to learn the basics, or let's say you want to learn an aspect of said spec or archetype. So what am I thinking I'm talking about is basically the specs and the classes that are available right now in World of Warcraft, but also just in general. I'm thinking about SOLOQ RPGs on the horizon. I'm thinking about Solo Shuffle. I'm thinking about twos and threes and also team RPGs. I think just in general, if you're new to melees or if you're new to ranged or you're new to healing, I think the best thing is to narrow down your choices to a beginner's friendly choice that is actually transposable knowledge towards other specs or classes. I'm going to give you an example. I think Monk, at least Windwalker Monk, has a lot of difficulties actually transposing their gameplay onto other specs or classes because there is nothing really alike monks. I think just in general, how they play feels like a warrior kind of right now these days, but it still has the aspect of a sub rogue where you want to actually just burst inside of your burst windows. So I'm going to talk about melees, I'm going to talk about healer, and I'm also going to talk about ranged. Just in general, what I would suggest to you guys, what spec you can play. I am Togrim, I am a multi-classer, just in general, I'm an alcoholic, I do play every single spec or class except Evoker, so I'm not going to speak out about Evoker. I think it's also just not a very beginners friendly class to play because nothing is really alike Evoker. So I would just say to not play it until you have more experience as a ranged, but also as a melee, because I feel like there is a lot of aspects that are a bit crossing each other. So I want to talk about that. So I play nearly every single class to the fullest. There are a few classes where I play less. There are a few classes where I play way more. But I'm going to talk about a few classes where I would suggest any friend that is new to World of Warcraft, for PvP at least, and what aspect you can actually look forward to play at that game mode. So now let's talk about melees. I think there are a few options where you can actually learn to get better as a melee. I think melee is a lot easier at some aspects than ranged, but it is also a lot harder because, again, you are kind of the one guy that can actually line of sight your healer, or you can actually just push a bit too further beyond. You're vulnerable as well to a lot of comps where, to be honest, a melee, if you don't really are having the support that is needed, can be blasted out. But there are a few classes where you can play and be successful at it and still learn a lot of those patterns towards other classes and specs. So I'm going to suggest two classes that you should maybe play if you want to learn the melee aspect. And I think there is no surprise that Warrior is one of those melees. I think Arms Warrior and Fury Warrior is kind of the basic melee of the game, in my opinion, how it plays at least. I think Arms Warrior is a bit more methodical, although that methodology, I would say, is going to fade away like every single patch, because I don't know what they're doing, but they're changing the few things that are actually very, very fun about Arms. But they're doing it. You have multiple builds that you can play. There is a build where you can play around bleeds. You can also play a lot around multiple stats, so you're not really shoehorned into mastery or haste or crit. You can play everything and you can actually make it work somehow, some way. Of course, there's a meta build. Of course, there's a meta talent build. There's a meta stats that you should go for. But as a warrior, especially as an arms warrior, you have way more liberties to do that. Arms warrior is a bit more supportive than Fury. If you want to play Fury, that's good, but it's way more aggressive just in the playstyle of themselves. But they're also a lot less supportive. You don't have Banner, you don't have Duel, for example, and all those things can actually be very good in arenas. But in solo queue RPGs, you can be pretty much a RPG hero kinda. Just in battlegrounds as well, a Fury Warrior can just do whatever they can to actually be a BG hero. Of course, it's a lot easier with a healer. You will have a lot less fun, I would say, as a melee in BGs in general. I think in solo queue RPG, you don't have really the impact that you should be having as a warrior, but I think it's just basically how the maps are laid out and how the objectives are laid out and how it's portraying themselves. So it's not a problem that you cannot carry every single game, because you can feel that you carry, but it's not like you're going to solo win games in general solo queue. In solo shuffle, I think you can have a lot of fun in those melee lobbies or in those mixed lobbies where you have like one cast and one melee every single like round, and sometimes you have a double melee or double caster lobby. But I think just in general you are very versatile. I think warrior in general, if you're playing a melee, this spec and class just in general is very versatile with multiple comps, multiple play styles. You can play double DPS in twos, although it's not really recommended. You can still do that with an enhancement Shaman or with a Retribution Paladin, for example. You could also easily have a healer and then you have like a good comp. You can also play threes with multiple specs just crossed. You just need a healer and then you can play with either spec, with either class, and you can still perform very well. I think the basics of playing a melee is taught as a warrior. If you are ready to play a bit more of a mobile class, melee, I would say there is also the option of playing a Demon Hunter. I think Demon Hunter is also a very good class. Just in general, you have Havoc, just one DPS spec pretty much, and they are reworking it, so you have way more options to actually build your spec. I think you're still shoehorned into Mastery though. Unfortunately, you don't really have a lot of choices there. I think haste is not really optimal at all. I think it's not viable right now with how Mastery is portrayed and how it is currently playing a huge role in your damage. But I think if you're like wanting to play a silent kind of a warrior, but more squishy, I would say at times, but a bit more tanky at times because of blur and how it works, but also darkness and the leech and the self heals, I think Demon Hunter can also be very fun in BGs. I think in solo queue RPGs you're going to have a blast. I think in solo shuffle you will have a lot more better comps to play in. I think in twos you have one or two great comps with healers. You don't really play with a DPS in general. Like double DPS is not something that you can do as a Demon Hunter, in my opinion, because it's a lot of consistent damage that is very high, but it's still consistent. You have burst, but it's stoppable most of the time. And in threes, you are like a warrior. You have multiple comps that you can play in. I think it's a bit less versatile, but I think a lot of the things that you can learn from a Demon Hunter are actually very transposable to other classes. Also ranged, by the way. I will also make a video a bit closer to 10.2 where I really do a tier list of the specs. I think it's better for beginners and for veterans, I would say. But I think those two classes as melees are probably the best ones. Now I'm going to talk about healers. I think healer-wise, you have a lot of options. I would personally think that there are a few harder classes to play. I think Mistweaver Monk is one of them that is actually not very hard to play, but hard to master. I think it's also very hard to actually transpose the skills from a Mistweaver to another healer. So I would not really recommend a Mistweaver. There is also Priest, which has 2 healing specs, which then I would recommend to play Priest, because you have 1 range spec first and foremost, you have 2 healer specs, which are both different and way different, I would say. This Priest is more a aggressive healer normally, where you can heal through damage that you're doing, and you have a lot more of those damage reduction abilities that you can actually press. I think it's also one of them that is also very fun to play, although I don't think it's very transposable skill as well. But you have for that Holy Priest, which is probably, I think everyone can actually agree to that, one of the more classical healers out there. Now it's also a bit backwards, where you want to actually drop your biggest heals whenever someone is low, instead of like trying to prevent them from going low. That's something that the Holy Priest actually has to deal with. It's also incredibly strong. The mastery is very strong also on that class, although it's, I think, nerfed in 10.2 into, or at least reshaped into a faster hot, but for a lot less stronger, I would say. But you have the leisure and the pleasure to actually have 2 healing specs where you can learn from both with just 1 class. There is just no other class that can actually provide you that. You have hybrid classes where you can be melee, ranged, and healer, or or just melee and healer, but you have ways to actually, again, have fun with those classes. So I would recommend priest, and my second recommendation would be, I would say, I'm very biased. I think Holy Paladin is probably the better healer to learn just in general right now, because it's how strong it is, how it got a rework and actually made them very fun to play offensively, passively. You have some builds that you can actually play. You can play more of a melee healer kinda. You can also play more of a laid back healer with a lot of utilities. You can also be very aggressive with your damage, especially in 10.2 where they buff those single target damage. There's ways to actually, like, again, be useful as a Holy Paladin outside of your heals because of freedom, bubbles, bops. You have way more tools than a lot of the classes I discussed. But you're very vulnerable to dispels, to master spells from priests. In general, you have great CC, but you have to kind of go really close to the other healers or DPSs to actually do that. Most of the CC is also very stoppable by a dispel, and also just it's one of those classes that are easy to play but also harder to master. I think the difference between a beginner Holy Paladin and a veteran Holy Paladin is very big, but I think in general it's something you can learn and you can actually adapt to it. I think it's also one of the classical heals in my opinion, compared to, let's say, a Shaman which has totems, or the resto druid, which is all about hots and like uptime of it, and also just not being very aggressive to it, especially in threes or in soul shuffle. I think all healers can play aggressively in twos, depending on situations. I think in threes there are a few healers that can play aggressive, and I think Resto Druid is one of them that is not able to do that in threes right now. And I think in SOLOQ RPGs you can have a blast with all healers. So if you want to play SOLOQ RPG, it's a tough time to actually choose a healer because they are all very proficient. And I think the healing aspect of a RPG, like a SOLOQ RPG, is very broad. You can do a lot of things and actually have a lot of proficiency behind it. So those are the two classes I would suggest to main. Again, if I would say I'm like the biggest bias guy in the world, I would say go play Resto Shaman because it's, for me, the most fun spec to play, but it's also one of them that is just not transposable skill. You cannot really unlearn how to play without totems whenever you're playing a Holy Paladin or a Priest, although I think those two classes are a bit easier than Resto Shaman in general, like skill wise. I think if you want to play like a harder class, you can play Resto Shaman, but they are very much like a spec that is not often meta, and whenever it is meta, it is really for a short time, so be ready to suffer on some patches. Now I want to talk about ranged, and I'm a huge ranged spec fan, although my channel is probably more known about my enhancement and my arms warriors, fury warrior guides, also my BM hunters and such. And I'm a huge fan of warlock. I'm a huge fan of elemental shaman. I'm actually also a very big fan of just hunter in general. And if I have to choose just one class that is actually very good at learning how to play ranged, in my opinion, would be warlock. Now, the issue with warlock is there are often the subject of a lot of nerfs, which often are overkill. I'm going to say that if you're maining warlock, you will most likely have to jump specs all the time between affliction, demonology warlock, and destruction warlock. There is often like one or two specs that are actually quite good in PvP, and then the other one which is a bit like left behind. There are times where they are all three very good and all three very bad. That's not immune, but I think as a warlock you learn kiting, which is very important on a lot of specs, like for example mage and hunter. Also think you can also learn how to blast correctly like an elemental shaman, and you can also play more of a setup based spec, for example demonology warlock, which can learn you how to play balance druid, which is very much of a setup spec. You can actually learn how to kite, how to be in line of sight of your healer, how to survive most of your damage. You have tools to actually help your teammates with heartstones, with fears, which is spammable and very good CC. If you can actually just spam fear, often than not, it's already a lot of the work is done for you, I would say. I think in general you have like one pet spec, which is in my opinion not the most fun spec. I think BM Hunter is way more fun as a pet spec, for example, but again, you can play that as a demonology warlock. You can also play more of a dot spec, which is more of a dampening kind of thing. Dampening means that over time the healing of the healers are going to be diminished, or the mana is going to be diminished, and you're going to win over time, kind of thing. You can also win like directly if you have a good drain and you have the good CC behind it, but often you will win a lot further into the match. While Destruction Warlock is one of the bigger pumpers in the game, I think. You can compare Destruction Warlock to, let's say, Elemental Shaman or MM Hunter, kinda-ish, I guess. But you have tools to actually have a lot of fun with that class just in general. So that would be my suggestion. Again, it's a very biased one. Some people may say mage, some people may say something else. I think Warlock is probably the one that is way easier to learn than a mage. I think, again, I'm biased, I'm playing Warlock. I think as a Warlock you have way more tools to actually survive the initial burst than a mage. A mage, if you don't know how to survive, you're going to get destroyed. But you can learn with Warlock how to play mage. So that's the first one. The second one I would suggest for ranged, and that is a suggestion, but I think it's not really transposable skill. I think once you play that class, you're not going to have an easier time playing another ranged, but you do learn the kiting aspect, which is also very big for a ranged one. I forgot about to say that warlocks are very much the BG heroes. You can really carry games just being there and knowing what to do whenever you are a warlock, for example. But my second suggestion would be Hunter. They have MM, they have BM. Survival Hunter, you can see it as a hybrid melee range kind of spec. It's very versatile, I would say. The playstyle between BM, MM, and Survival is way different, although it's still based around trying to CC the enemy healer and then burst, or burst and try to put the healer into a weird spot where they have to choose between avoiding your CC or healing. Again, I am normally a BM Hunter main. Now, I think in 10.2 there is a world where I'm going to remain BM Hunter, because they do change the talent system to the talent points to actually accommodate to other builds, which is very fun to play around. But in general, you will feel like you're kind of kiting most of the time. You don't have really a cast bar kind of thing. You have a cast time on your spells, for example in MM with rapid fire and aim shot, and also sniper shot, but it's not cancelable through an interrupt. It's cancelable through a stun or a mini CC or whatever, a micro CC, but it's not like something that you can really mess up most of the time. If you're kiting and you say, whatever, I'm going to get damaged, I'm just going to try to unlock my abilities, you can still do that as a hunter, especially as a BM hunter, because if they're going for you, nothing really changes damage-wise, so that you are already like one aspect away from the other classes and range specs, I would say. Warlock still needs to be aware of, look, I can dish a lot of damage, but I know that I will get also a lot of damage on myself, and maybe get an interrupt, which may end up costing me the life, for example. While a hunter, they can just say, look, I'm still going to have my damage out, I just know, I need to know if my pet is rooted, I still need to know the health bar of my pet, especially as a BM hunter, for example. I need to know what's up with my damage, but pretty much I just need to know how to do rotation. You don't need to know how to fake cast your rotation. You don't need to try to fake a spell to get interrupted and then do another spell right away, for example. With a warlock, you're casting, for example, incinerate, getting kicked, and you directly do a fear, for example, or a chaos bolt. But as a hunter, you're not going to think, look, I'm going to do a kill command, but I'm going to get interrupted and I'm going to do a cobra shot. That's not going to happen. You're still going to do a kill command, and you're still going to do cobra shots, you're still going to do kill shots. You still are going to do your barb shots. I know that cobra shot is not used in PvP. I don't use it. I'm just using as an example. So before you write in the comments cobra shot is not used, I know that. Thank you. I am a hunter main before, and I might main it in 10.2, but I think it's also a range spec that you are probably going to learn a lot from it. Now, again, I left out a category because I think that's very, very precise and not everyone is going to like it, but there is the hybrid kind of spec, which is relying on damage, but also a lot of utility and also a lot of heals sometimes, depending on the spec. Some specs just don't have a lot of off heals. I'm thinking about feral druids right now, which is a bit sad. But you have specs that are more, I would say, around the hybrid aspect and how to actually be utile for your team. And there are a few specs and classes that have that. For example, Elemental Shaman, Enhancement Shaman, Balance Druid, Feral Druid, Shadow Priest, Retribution Paladin. I would say Windwalker Monk is not really a hybrid in my eyes. That they have a hybrid aspect, but it's not really a hybrid in my mind. The camera is again unfocused, unfortunately. But if I have to think about a hybrid that you have to learn probably, and you will learn a lot of aspects from a hybrid, I think Retribution Paladin is probably the better one, which you can then combine it with Holy Paladin. Why Retribution Paladin? I know the off heals are not fantastic. That may change in the future, but you still have freedom, you still have buffs, you have also a Blessing of Spell Warding now as a PvP taunt, you have ways to help your teammates, you have still the utility from Sank, for example. There are a lot of things that can actually be applied to other specs. I think Retribution Paladin is probably the one that is easier to learn because you have a lot of those stops. Just in general, you press a button and sometimes it just stops a go. For example, a sacrifice is a very big button. While it doesn't seem like it, a 1 minute sacrifice is very strong. But you can play Retribution Paladin and have a lot of success with it. I think if you need a ranged hybrid, I would suggest Elemental Shaman because they have also great off heals, by the way. They don't really have a lot of those stops like a Retribution Paladin, but they have Hex, which is a ranged CC option that you can actually press. Although often than not, they are going for you. Let's be honest, Elemental Shaman is the kill target most of the games. But you can do a lot of damage without casting. You can pretty much like have all the totems possible to help your teammate. You have an anti-fear, anti-charm, anti-sleep. You have your slow totems, your root totems. You have slows yourself with frost shock, for example. A lot of instant casts. You can blast, you can heal, you can earth shield, you can do a lot of things. You can push people off the ledges, for example, especially in SOLOQ RPGs. You're going to love it. I think in general those two specs and classes are probably better for hybrid. If you want to learn a hybrid aspect, I would say for a melee hybrid it would be Retribution Paladin. If you want to learn a ranged hybrid, which again I think it's more ranged than hybrid, but still if you want to learn a ranged hybrid, I think Elemental Shaman is your go-to spec class. So thank you for watching this video. I hope it did help you with your choice for 10.2. I hope I can learn you how to PvP if you're new, if you're like not a veteran, if you're again trying to reach your goals. I hope I can help you with that. If it's not, again, let me know what I can do to change it, to make you understand how to PvP a bit better so you can enjoy it yourself, because I think PvP is such a wonderful just base of fun that you can have in any game. I think it's very competitive, it's very satisfying as well whenever you're doing it good. So hopefully I can teach you how to have fun in PvP. Again, thank you and have a great day. Bye.